Alright, so welcome back. We are now covering World War II, course of the war, and strategies. So previously, we've covered kind of the beginnings of the war. We've talked about, the United States at home, the economic issues that we had to deal with and kind of get the economy going and raring to go to actually build up to this point, as well as, how the war impacted a number of different groups. So women, African Americans, we briefly talked about Japanese Americans and a few other groups in there too. So primarily what we're looking at here is kind of describing the goals for the Allies to win World War II and analyze why different strategies were used against the different Axis powers and how this kind of culminated in this, final acts to finally defeat the Axis powers. So, this video and the next one will kind of cover all of that. We'll see how far we get with each one. So, just to kind of clarify which sides are, who's on which side. So the main Axis powers are Germany, Italy, and Japan. And there's a few other countries that they've thrown in there as well that we're going to look at here on this map on the next page. The Allies, the big countries are the US, Great Britain, Soviet Union. I forgot, I don't know why I didn't throw in China, but China's in there, Canada, France, Free French Forces, Australia, and a number of other countries as well. But these are the big three on each side, all right, as they go off to fight each other kind of, as we said, around the globe. So kind of what we covered early on. So, Germany during their expansion, during Hitler's buildup, he rebuilds the army, and, the Allies, primarily France and Great Britain, are appeasing Hitler. They don't want to go to war as Hitler, he takes over Austria without firing a shot. He demands that area of Czechoslovakia around here, and then takes the rest of the land, and then he demands what was Poland in this area. So prior to World War II actually beginning, he was very fearful of fighting what we call a two-front war. Right, much like in World War I, where the Germans had to fight big old Russia over here, and France, Belgium, and Britain over here, as well as Italy a little bit more to the south, even though Austria-Hungary was right there as well. So right before he invades Poland, he signs a treaty with the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, the communist leader of Russia at that point, and they agreed not to go to war with each other, which bought Hitler time. So when Hitler invades Poland, within the last 9 days or so, when Poland is fighting for its life because the Allies can't get to them, being Great Britain and France can't get all the way over here, the Soviets on this side end up invading and taking over the most eastern portions of Poland, which helps to kind of further cement the unfortunate Polish defeat. So then for the next essentially 2 years, or more like a year and a half, it's pretty quiet on the Eastern Front. So then we saw the Nazis take over Denmark and Norway at the same time they take the Netherlands, or Holland at that point, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. All right. In the meantime, the Soviet Union tries to invade Finland and kind of struggles with that a little bit. They also take over these countries here within Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia up here. Italy tries from its base in Albania right here to invade Yugoslavia and Greece and is defeated, so Hitler has to pull his forces in to invade those countries. And then at the same time, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria all sign alliances with the Germans, all right, which gives them this huge front to invade the Soviet Union in the spring of 1941, right about 6 months prior to the invasion or the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. So the German army actually almost takes Moscow, okay, capital city of the Soviet Union, Leningrad, which is also what we know as St. Petersburg today. And by 1941, what saves them is the Soviet winter, the number of Soviet troops, and that kind of brings the war to the standstill until spring of 1942, when the German war machine and Blitzkrieg can get back into it, while Great Britain's off here alone, as we talked about with the Battle of Britain. All right. So the Axis goal, the goal of Germany, Italy, and Japan. All right, we're talking about spreading across into these areas to establish their empires, Europe, Africa, Western Asia, and collect materials needed for war and kind of, again, establishing these empires. So coal, fuel, oil, a lot of that coming from the Soviet Union, the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific. All right. At the same time, to really hurt the Allied ability to fight back and kind of aid each other in this fight, because Great Britain and the Soviet Union are far away from each other, the United States has to cross oceans to help each side. Use of the U-boats, the submarines like World War I, to hurt and destroy Allied shipping of both soldiers and materials to help both sides fight the war. Or, in this case, the Allies' ability to maintain and fight the war across a broad spectrum. Right, because the U.S. has to, help everyone on all sides and is kind of be that great big force to help kind of get them all going. All right, so this is kind of, again, one of those propaganda things that we've talked about. The idea of where the Germans are going to be pushing and trying to reconquer, in this, I guess, very Axis-driven propaganda world. Japanese fleet after they take up India, which they actually were trying to get into India. By the way, there were some fightings in the Indian subcontinent. Oh, they're going to go this way, take the Suez Canal, and boom, they're all going to come here, and then they're going to, take over the United States together. This is kind of like worst case scenario. Everything goes really, really well in the long run for the Axis powers. It's kind of the worst fleet. So, or sorry, the worst scenario. All right. So we've looked at this map before. Japanese expansion before Pearl Harbor. Okay. So Japan has taken Korea. This is back in 1910. Took Manchuria in 1931, 1932. And then 37 begins their full-on invasion of mainland China, capturing much of the major cities, especially on the coastline, but also taking these areas of Vietnam, Cambodia, on the border that had once belonged to France as colonies. So the day after Pearl Harbor, we then begin to see Japan go into, really, as we said, all-out assault to try and take as much territory as possible before the United States can, react. So that includes the area that is the Philippines, which is at this point a U.S. territory, Singapore all the way down here, British Malaya, going into Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and trying to get actually almost to Australia too. So it's pretty dire consequences, pretty dire stuff. And then all these like little islands here, the Marianas, the Marshall Islands, Guam, these areas in the Carolina Islands and Micronesia are not in Japanese hands at this point, but they do become Japanese territories and conquered areas by the Japanese as a result after Pearl Harbor. So as we said, go for broke. So it looks like this by middle of 1942, they have grabbed all of this territory. All right. So essentially, here's the island of Taiwan, back then known as Formosa. They have grabbed all of this extra territory within the span of about 6.5 months. All right, and continue to pressure and continue to push on through. So that's what the U.S. has to kind of deal with, that, we have to react to both sides of the conflict. All right, so kind of a back-to-back image of that growth within these areas. All right, so a lot of American territories had fallen by that point. So the Allied strategy, and this is where we're going to kind of end the video, and then we'll bring it back to focusing on Germany in the next one, and then Japan on the final one. All right, so the Allied strategy is what's known as a German first policy. The U.S. has to fight both areas, and so do the British as well. Countries like Australia and Russia, obviously, they can focus on primarily one thing, same with China. But for the most part, the U.S. has to focus on fighting Germany first. They are considered the bigger ultimate threat to democracy and to everybody abroad because they are considered the bigger force, the more advanced force. So it's a German first policy. So they have to keep the USSR, the Soviet Union, in the war, and they have to slowly get themselves closer to Germany. So the idea for the Allies is going to be opening up a second front to kind of relieve pressure off the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union is pretty much keeping the German forces at bay and preventing them from going further in. So Germany is supporting Italy at this point in their invasion of North Africa, and they've been fighting back and forth in kind of Egypt and Libya for the last few years. They've taken the French territories of Algeria, Morocco, and kind of been putting their forces in there. So before the Allies can get back into Europe, they figure, well, we got to get the Americans some experience. So we're going to go into North Africa, and then after that we will move our way into Italy, and then eventually get ourselves ready for that invasion of France known as D-Day, so the reconquering of Western Europe. But we have to slowly build up, because in 1942 the U.S. forces are not ready, either with experience or leadership or building up technology to make a successful invasion of Western Europe. It's just not ready. All right. So Germany, as we said, is going for broke in this area known as Soviet. And the Soviet Union heads further south into the Soviet Union towards the area known as Stalingrad, which we'll come back and talk about that as the bloodiest battle of World War II. In the meantime, what the Allies can do is bombing. Okay, bombing specific targets that support the German war effort to help, make it a little bit easier on the Allied effort to actually get themselves into Germany, make Germany less effective. So with the German Luftwaffe being that big machine force at the very beginning of the war with the Lightning Blitzkrieg, using precision bombing on the German side to kind of take out the Allies, after the Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe is kind of struggling. And by 1942 and 43, especially into 44 and 45, the Luftwaffe is nothing what it used to be. All right, what seems like unlimited resources of the United States is very effective, and the United States is doing a very good job with the British on that, and can't take them out. Essentially making sure that the Luftwaffe really is not much of a threat. All right, but they have to slowly try and bring down these German efforts, of the German ability to bring everything back up and manufacture stuff, which has kind of its own issues. So they target areas like oil refineries, rail yards, factories, bases. All right, again, stuff that is relying on the war effort that would help best support Germany, and it has mixed success. All right, now on talking about Japan, we'll refer back to this later on when we come back in there. Their strategy to take on the Japanese, what we call island hopping. All right, so because we're fighting a two-front war, Germany is considered the bigger threat, but we still have to prevent Japan from expanding further into China, into Australia, further into the Pacific. There are less materials and less numbers to fight the Japanese, so we have to be more precise with what we do. So initially, we're going to play defense, okay, due to Japan's quick invasion. So we're going to turn the tide of the Battle of Midway, and then we'll do this island hopping strategy. We'll talk more about the Battle of Midway in that next video, or the one we're talking about Japan. So the goal for the Allies is going to be take the most important islands as held by the Japanese and skip the less important ones, because Japan takes a lot of different islands. Okay, we're talking thousands of them are under Japanese control. All right, so we're going to focus on the ones that are really important and then literally blockade and leave the other ones isolated, because there's not every important thing. It's not worth all the lives. So once we've taken those islands, we're going to put air bases on them, and then we're going to try and start bombing Japan and other supportive islands that will kind of help with that. And that will start with the Battle of Guadalcanal, where the U.S. Marines really get their feet on the ground in terms of those battles and efforts for getting that experience in the Pacific. All right, Battle of Midway is going to be a very big naval battle that is essentially what stops Japan from expanding, and again, we'll talk about that later. So the use of the naval warfare to destroy Japanese ships and their ability to invade and reinforce. So this is where we're talking about the submarines not being destroyed at Pearl Harbor, which will hurt the Japanese merchant fleet and Japan's ability to maintain and support their massive empire throughout the Pacific Ocean. All right, the goal is to eventually get closer to Japan in order to get them to surrender. So we will come back and talk about these certain battles and how they turn the tide, Midway, Stalingrad, El Alamein, D-Day, and a few others in that next video. So cover those in a little bit.